At the trial, my son hired a lawyer to prove I was guilty. 2 weeks earlier, Austin sat across from me in my own office and said, "Dad, you're old. Time to rest. I'll take over the company." When I refused, he walked out without another word. I never imagined the vicious plan he'd set in motion. When the court envelope arrived at my office, I was shocked, writing the accusations inside. It shattered everything I believed about my family. He thought he could defeat this old man. He had no idea what was waiting for him, a lesson he'd remember for the rest of his life. Have you ever been turned against by a loved one when you refused to give them what they wanted? Comment on your story, and where you're watching, I want to hear. The federal courthouse in Seattle smelled of polished oak and decades of judgment. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands flat against the wood grain, feeling every one of my 62 years in the weight of this moment. Claire Donovan sat beside me, her briefcase open, documents arranged in perfect order. She'd spent 3 months building our defense. I'd spent 30 years building what my son was trying to destroy. The gallery behind us was packed. Word had spread through Seattle's construction community. James Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Development Group, sued for bankruptcy by his own son. The curious came to watch a family tear itself apart in public. The doors at the back opened. Austin entered first, his stride, confident, shoulders back. 34 years old and carrying himself like he already owned the company. His suit was Italian, probably cost more than my first truck. Behind him came Amber, his wife of 2 years. Designer dress catching the overhead lights, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She'd dressed for victory. My wife Diane followed last, her eyes fixed on the floor. 60 years old, and she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. She wouldn't meet my gaze as she took her seat on their side of the room. That hurt more than I'd expected. They settled at the plaintiff's table. Richard Thornton, Austin's lawyer, leaned over to whisper something. Austin nodded, that same entitled expression he'd worn since childhood, now hardened into something colder. Judge Whitman entered. We rose, then sat. The formalities blurred together until the moment he opened the case file. The room fell silent as he reviewed the documents Claire had submitted 2 days ago. Bank records, financial statements, forensic analyses that had cost me a small fortune to compile. Minutes stretched. The only sound was the faint rustle of paper. Judge Whitman stopped reading. He removed his reading glasses slowly, deliberately, and looked up at the courtroom. His eyes swept across both tables, measuring, weighing. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 25 years on the federal bench. "I've reviewed these financial records. Someone in this courtroom is lying to my face." Austin's confident posture wavered just slightly. Amber's smile froze, her hand gripping the table edge. Diane stared down at her trembling fingers, shoulders drawn tight. I sat there quietly, waiting for the moment I'd spent 30 years learning to understand. To understand this betrayal, you need to know where it all began. Seattle, 1994. I was 32 years old with $30,000 in savings, a used pickup truck, and a single construction contract for a strip mall in Renton. The project was small 8 storefronts, basic commercial work, but it was mine. I remember standing in that empty lot at dawn, holding the blueprints, while rain soaked through my jacket, thinking this was either the smartest or stupidest thing I'd ever done. The first 5 years nearly broke me. I took loans I couldn't afford, bid on projects with margins so thin one mistake would have buried me. There were nights I didn't sleep. Mornings I showed up to job sites running on coffee in desperation. Diane worked double shifts as a nurse to keep us afloat, while I poured every dollar back into the business. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Ballard, ate ramen more nights than not, and she never once complained. Brick by brick, contract by contract, Caldwell Development Group grew. Small commercial buildings became office complexes. Office complexes became mixed-use developments. By the time Seattle's tech boom hit in the early 2000s, we were positioned perfectly experienced enough to handle major projects, hungry enough to outwork everyone else. 30 years later, the company was worth $200 million. Our buildings shaped Seattle's skyline. The Caldwell name meant something in this city. Austin was born in 1991, right when things started turning around. He never knew the struggle, never saw me laying brick at 3 in the morning or begging banks for extensions. He grew up in the house in Laurelhurst, with water views, attended Lakeside School, alongside tech billionaires. Kids drove a Range Rover at 16. Everything came easy because I'd made sure it would. I thought I was giving him opportunity. What I actually gave him was entitlement. He coasted through the University of Washington's business school, more interested in networking events than actual coursework. Graduated with decent grades and vague ambitions. He talked about taking things to the next level and modernizing the family business, without understanding what the business actually was. 30 years of relationships, reputation, and grinding work that couldn't be disrupted by whatever trendy MBA concepts he'd half learned. But he was my son. I believed he'd find his way. 3 years ago, he met Amber Kane at a charity gala downtown. She was 27, striking in a way that turned heads across the room, and she'd positioned herself near Austin all evening with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. They were engaged within 4 months. I met her twice before the wedding. Both times something felt off. The way she asked pointed questions about the company's valuation, how she steered conversations toward succession planning, the calculating look behind her practiced smile. But she was polite, charming when it mattered, and Austin was clearly infatuated. Diane liked her. She's ambitious, James. That's not a crime. Austin could use someone who pushes him. So I stayed quiet, smiled at the wedding, wrote the check for their honeymoon in Bali, welcomed her into the family. At the time, I didn't know that my silence would cost me everything. Those early years nearly destroyed me. The first real project was a 4-story office building in Bellevue. Modest scope, tight budget, impossible timeline. I bid so low to win the contract that one serious mistake would have bankrupted us. The general contractor I'd hired took my deposit and disappeared 3 weeks. In leaving half-finished framing and unpaid subcontractors threatening to walk, I couldn't afford to start over. So I didn't. I bought a tool belt, showed up at dawn, and worked alongside the crew. 16-hour days, 7 days a week. My hands blistered, then calloused, then bled through the calluses. Diane kept the books at night, after her nursing shifts, answering the business line from our kitchen table while our infant son slept in the next room. We lived on 5 hours of sleep and coffee that tasted like gasoline. The bank that financed the project, a small credit union in Fremont, had my personal guarantee. If the building failed, they'd take our apartment, our truck, everything. The loan officer, a guy named Patterson, drove by the site every Friday to check progress. I learned to read his face. When he frowned, I worked faster. We finished 2 weeks early and $8,000 under budget. Patterson recommended us for the next project. Then another contractor did. Word spread slowly through Seattle's construction network. Caldwell delivers. Caldwell's honest. Caldwell doesn't cut corners. It wasn't glamorous. It was 30 years of showing up doing what I promised. Building relationships, one project at a time. No shortcuts. No leverage. Just discipline and a reputation earned brick by brick. That's what built Caldwell Development Group. Back in that courtroom, none of that history mattered to my son. Richard Thornton rose from the plaintiff's table, his movements practiced and smooth. He was expensive, the kind of lawyer whose hourly rate could fund a small construction crew for a week. Austin had spared no expense. Your Honor, Thornton began, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. The facts of this case are straightforward. 3 years ago, James Caldwell entered into a private family loan agreement with his son, Austin Caldwell, in the amount of $7 million. The purpose was to provide bridge financing during a corporate restructuring. He clicked a remote. Documents appeared on the overhead screen. Loan agreements, promissory notes, payment schedules. Despite repeated requests for repayment, Mr. James Caldwell has refused to honor this debt. This despite the fact that Caldwell Development Group is currently valued at over $200 million and maintains substantial liquid assets. Another click. Financial statements appeared, numbers highlighted in yellow. The company's assets are at risk. My client's rights as a creditor must be protected. We're asking this court to grant immediate bankruptcy protection and appoint a trustee to ensure. Diane pressed a tissue to her eyes, though I couldn't tell if they were actual tears. Austin sat rigid beside her, jaw clenched, projecting injured righteousness. Amber remained perfectly composed, one manicured hand resting on the table, watching the proceedings like someone observing a chess match. Judge Whitman's eyes narrowed as he read the documents in front of him. His pen moved across the page, stopped, moved again. Then halfway down the third page, the pen stopped moving. 8 years before that courtroom, I made a choice I'd come to regret more than any business decision in my life. Austin showed up at my office one Monday morning, diploma still fresh from UW's Foster School of Business. He didn't knock. Just walked in, sat down across from my desk, and said, "I'm ready to join the company." I'd known this conversation was coming. Part of me had looked forward to it teaching my son the business, eventually handing him something I'd spent decades building. But another part, the part I'd been ignoring, had doubts. "You'd start as a project manager," I said carefully. "Learn how we operate, work your way up. Understand the business from the ground level." His face hardened. "I'm a Caldwell. I have an MBA. I shouldn't be starting at the bottom like some junior hire." "I started at the bottom, Austin. That's how you learn what matters." "Times have changed, Dad. That's old school thinking." He leaned forward. "I'm asking for Vice President of Development. It's a family business. I'm family." I should have said no. Should have made him prove himself first. But Diane had been talking about succession planning, about keeping the company in the family, about how Austin needed to feel valued. So I compromised, told myself it would be fine that he'd grow into the role. Vice President at 26. No experience beyond classroom theory. The problem started immediately. Austin treated longtime employees like they worked for him rather than with him. Made decisions without consulting the project managers who'd been building in Seattle since before he was born. During one meeting, he told our senior superintendent, a guy who'd been with me for 18 years, that his methods were inefficient and needed disrupting. The superintendent came to my office afterward, said if Austin stayed, he'd start looking elsewhere. Austin pushed for shortcuts, cheaper materials that barely met code, faster timelines that stressed crews and compromised quality. He talked constantly about maximizing shareholder value, seemingly forgetting that I was the only shareholder, and I'd built this company on delivering more than promised, not less. "You're too conservative, Dad," he'd say during our increasingly tense meetings. "The old way is dying. We need to think bigger, move faster." "The old way built a $200 million company," I'd reply. "Maybe there's a reason it works," but he never listened. Just smiled that entitled smile and did what he wanted anyway. I kept hoping he'd mature. That responsibility would teach him what college hadn't, that patience and experience would eventually click. Then 2 years ago, he announced his engagement. Austin had been dating Amber Kane for 8 months, a whirlwind romance that left Diane delighted and me uneasy. The wedding was extravagant, held at a waterfront venue in Bellevue with 200 guests and enough flowers to stock a nursery. Amber had planned every detail, each one more expensive than the last. Austin paid for it with a draw against his future inheritance. At the reception, Amber found me during cocktail hour. "James," she said, her smile perfectly calibrated, "Austin tells me you're thinking about succession planning. Have you considered a timeline?" "I'm 60, not retired yet?" "Of course not. But companies like Caldwell need forward planning." She sipped her champagne. "What's the structure? Will Austin inherit outright? Or is there a trust?" The directness caught me off guard. "That's family business, Amber." Her smile never wavered. "I am family now." A week later, Diane mentioned that Amber had asked her similar questions over lunch, about estate planning, company ownership, what Austin stood to inherit, and when. "She asks a lot about money," Diane said quietly. "She's just interested in Austin's career," I replied, wanting to believe it. Within months, Austin's demands escalated. Bigger office, higher salary, more authority over contracts and hiring. He started talking about modernizing leadership and preparing for transition. I suspected Amber's influence, but told myself it was temporary, that the novelty would wear off. But Amber's ambition was only beginning. The change in Austin happened slowly, then all at once. It started with comments. Casual observations dropped into conversation like stones into still water. "You're 61 now, Dad. Most guys retire at 65. The company could be worth more if we modernized faster, moved more aggressively. You've been working for 40 years. Don't you want to enjoy what you've built?" At first I brushed them off. Austin had always been impatient. But the comments increased in frequency, and I began noticing patterns. The same phrases, the same angles of persuasion delivered with a confidence that didn't sound entirely like my son. Then came the dinner at their house in Madison Park. Amber had insisted, said it was important for family to spend time together. The meal was elaborate, catered, served on china that probably cost more than my first truck. Halfway through the main course, Amber steered the conversation where she'd clearly been planning to take it all along. "James, you've built something incredible," she said, her tone warm but calculated. "Don't you ever think about stepping back, enjoying it?" I enjoy the work, I replied. But there's so much else you could be doing. Travel, time with Diane. She glanced at Austin. Austin has such ambitious plans for expansion. Fresh perspectives, you know. The company's doing fine as it is. Fine isn't great, though, is it? Austin cut in. We could be doing more, growing faster. If leadership was willing to take risks. I looked at my son, saw Amber's hand resting on his arm, saw the way he glanced at her before speaking. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was coordinated. Over the following months, Austin became bolder. He challenged my decisions in board meetings, questioned my judgment in front of senior staff. His respect, already thin, eroded completely. During one particularly tense meeting about a proposed development in Redmond, he openly accused me of being too risk-averse and stuck in the past. Afterward, he cornered me in my office. Maybe it's time we talked about succession planning, he said. Seriously talked about it. I'm 62, Austin, not dead. But you're not getting younger either. 6 months before that courtroom, Austin requested a private meeting. Late afternoon, my office, the Seattle skyline stretching beyond the windows, every building out there a reminder of what I'd spent my life creating. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. I want to buy you out, Austin said flatly. $50 million for your controlling shares. You retire, I take over as CEO. Clean transition. The number was so absurdly low, I almost laughed. This company is worth $200 million, Austin. $50 million is more than generous for a retirement package. You keep some equity step away from operations. Everybody wins. No. His jaw tightened. Dad, you're 62 years old. How much longer can you keep this pace? As long as I choose. This isn't about age. It's about readiness. You're not ready. Not ready. His voice rose. I've been ready. You just won't let go. You're holding me back. Holding the entire company back. I stood up, keeping my voice level. This conversation is over. When you understand what it means to build something instead of just inheriting it, we'll talk. Austin's face went cold. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the framed photos on my credenza. Pictures of projects I'd built, crews I'd worked alongside, the life I'd constructed from nothing. What I didn't know, Amber was waiting outside. Austin's phone had been recording the entire conversation. 2 weeks later, Amber made her move. I didn't know what was happening behind my back until it was almost too late. 6 months before that courtroom, Amber made an appointment with Richard Thornton. According to records Claire obtained later, they met at Canlis over lunch. Amber called it a family dispute, a father refusing to honor a $7 million debt. Do you have documentation? Thornton asked. We'll need to reconstruct it, Amber replied without hesitation. The original records were informal. Thornton understood immediately. Documentation could be created. It was fraud, but it was lucrative. That's expensive work. Money isn't an issue. That evening, Amber presented the plan to Austin. She'd laid it out with surgical precision, fabricated loan agreements, bankruptcy petition, legal pressure to force me out. Austin stared at the papers. This is fraud, Amber. That's my father. Your father is stealing your future, she said calmly. Your inheritance. Everything you've earned by being his son. This is the only way. There has to be another. You tried reasoning with him. He humiliated you, called you unready. She moved closer. He'll never respect you unless you force him to. Austin's resentment, carefully cultivated over months, finally won. What do we need to do? They worked late into the night, forging documents with my signature while I worked late at my office, completely unaware. 4 months before trial, Diane couldn't sleep. Past midnight, she heard voices from the home office. Austin and Amber had taken over my old study for business work. Through the partially open door, Diane saw them hunched over Austin's laptop documents, spread across the desk. The signature needs to look older, Amber was saying. Press harder on the downstrokes. What if forensics can tell? Austin asked. Your father won't publicly accuse his own son of forgery. Family loyalty works both ways. Diane's breath caught. She stepped back, heart pounding, and retreated to our bedroom. The next morning she waited until Austin left. Then she confronted Amber in the kitchen. I heard you two last night, Diane said, voice shaking. What are you doing? What happened next? Diane wouldn't tell me for 4 months, not until that witness stand. Amber's expression transformed instantly. She stepped forward and grabbed Diane's wrist hard enough to bruise. You didn't hear anything. Amber, this is serious. You say one word to James, I'll turn Austin against you forever. You'll die alone wondering where your son went. Amber's grip tightened. And if you push me, accidents happen to older people. Falls, car crashes. You understand? The threat was real, delivered with dead eyes. Do we understand each other? Diane nodded, trembling. Amber released her and smiled warmly. Good. Families should stick together. For 4 months, my wife lived with that secret slowly being destroyed from the inside, and I had no idea. I went to work every morning, came home to dinners where Diane seemed quieter, more withdrawn. I asked if she was okay. She always said yes. I didn't know she was terrified. I didn't know she'd been threatened with violence. I didn't know that while I slept, they were forging my signature building a case to destroy everything I'd built over 30 years. I didn't know any of it until that courtroom when Diane finally broke down and told the truth. By then, it was almost too late. Claire Donovan had spent 3 months building our defense. She stood now composed and precise, while Judge Whitman's words still hung in the air. Someone in this courtroom is lying to my face. The judge's gaze swept across both tables. Waiting. Claire rose smoothly. Your Honor, we move to dismiss with prejudice, based on comprehensive evidence of fraud. The alleged loan never existed. The documents are fabricated. She clicked her remote. The courtroom's overhead screen illuminated with the first exhibit. The gallery leaned forward. Austin's face drained of color. Exhibit A, Claire began. Forensic document analysis. Side-by-side signatures appeared on screen, James's authentic signatures from company contracts. On the left, the loan document signature. On the right, a certified forensic examiner analyzed these signatures over a 6-week period. Claire's laser pointer traced the differences. The pressure points are inconsistent. The stroke patterns don't match. The signature on the loan document shows hesitation marks, evidence of tracing or slow forgery, rather than natural writing flow. She let that sink in. This signature is a forgery. Thornton half rose. Your Honor, we dispute. You'll have your turn, counsel, Judge Whitman said flatly. Continue, Miss Donovan. Exhibit B, financial records. Bank statements filled the screen. Austin's accounts from 3 years prior, transaction logs, highlighted in yellow. The alleged loan date is March 15th, 3 years ago. $7 million supposedly transferred from Austin Caldwell to James Caldwell. Claire zoomed in on the relevant dates. Austin's bank records showed no outgoing transfer of $7 million. Not on that date. Not in that month. Not in the entire year. She switched to James's accounts. James Caldwell's records show no incoming deposit matching that amount. No wire transfer, no cashier's check, no transaction of any kind. The transaction logs were empty of anything resembling the claimed loan. The money never moved because the loan never existed. Claire advanced to the next slide. Exhibit C, account verification. The loan document appeared one line, highlighted a routing number and account number, where funds were supposedly deposited. This account number was listed as the receiving account for the $7 million loan. Claire paused for effect. We contacted every financial institution Austin and James Caldwell have ever used. This account does not exist, has never existed. The number appears to be randomly generated. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Judge Whitman's expression darkened. Your Honor, I'd like to call our forensic accountant. Mark Keller took the stand, mid-40s gray suit, the calm demeanor of someone who spent his career following money trails. Claire established his credentials quickly, 20 years in forensic accounting, previous testimony in federal cases, impeccable reputation. Mr. Keller, what did your investigation reveal? Keller spoke clearly, his voice carrying authority. I traced every financial transaction involving the Caldwell family over the past decade. Personal accounts, business accounts, trust funds, investment portfolios. Mr. James Caldwell provided complete transparency and full cooperation. He glanced at the documents in his lap, though he clearly didn't need them. My conclusion is unequivocal. No $7 million loan exists in any form. There is no documentation, no transfer of funds, no record in any ledger, any account, any financial instrument. The alleged loan is a fabrication. Thank you, Mr. Keller. Claire turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Forged signatures, phantom bank accounts, zero financial trail. This petition is built entirely on falsified documents. Austin's face had gone white, his hands gripping the table edge. Amber's jaw was locked tight, her knuckles bloodless where she clutched the armrest. Diane's tissue had been shredded into pieces in her trembling hands. Thornton shuffled papers, frantically searching for some counter-argument that wasn't there. Judge Whitman's expression remained coldly focused, his eyes moving between the evidence on screen and the people at the plaintiff's table. But Ms. Donovan wasn't finished. She had two more revelations that would shatter what remained of Austin's case. The courtroom went silent as Claire approached the bench with a manila folder. "Your Honor, we have evidence of additional fraudulent motive." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Amber Kane has been conducting an extramarital affair throughout the planning of this lawsuit. Austin's head snapped toward Amber, his expression pure shock. Claire clicked her remote. Photographs appeared on the overhead screen, Amber and a well-dressed man at a waterfront restaurant leaning close, her hand on his arm. More photos followed the same couple entering a downtown hotel, timestamps visible. 4 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago. Text message screenshots replaced the photos exchanges, too intimate to misinterpret. This man is Marcus Reed, a commercial real estate developer, a business associate of Austin Caldwell, through Caldwell Development Group projects. Claire's voice remained clinical, detached. The relationship began 8 months ago, coinciding precisely with when Mrs. Kane began planning this fraudulent lawsuit. More messages filled the screen. "Amber, once we get the $7 million, we can go anywhere?" "Marcus, your husband really doesn't know Amber. He's still useful for now." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Austin stared at Amber, his face contorting through betrayal and disbelief. Amber sat frozen in her carefully constructed mask, cracking, unable to form words. Judge Whitman's gavel came down hard. "Order, Claire, let the moment breathe," before continuing. "Your Honor, I have one final witness. I call Diane Caldwell to the stand." Confusion swept through the gallery. Austin looked up sharply. "Mom, what?" Diane stood slowly, trembling. She walked to the witness stand like someone approaching execution, was sworn in, and sat down. Her eyes were red tissue clutched in both hands. Claire's voice softened. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you have information relevant to this case?" Diane's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Yes." A long silence. Tears spilled down her cheeks. 4 months ago, I overheard my son and his wife in their home office. Her voice shook. They were discussing forging documents, loan papers that never existed. She swallowed hard. Creating fake signatures, planning how to present them in court. Gasps rippled through the room. James leaned forward. Pain etched across his face. Austin's expression shifted to something between shock and betrayal. His mother? "Why didn't you tell your husband?" Claire asked gently. Diane broke down completely. "Amber threatened me." Sobs racked her shoulders. "She said she'd turn Austin against me forever, that I'd lose my son." Her voice dropped. "She grabbed my wrists, told me accidents could happen to old people. Falls. Car crashes." She looked across the courtroom at James, her face devastated. "James, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I was terrified." James's expression mixed understanding with heartbreak. Diane continued through tears. "I watched them plan to destroy you, and I said nothing." Her voice cracked. "I was a coward, but I can't stay silent anymore." She couldn't speak further, overcome. Judge Whitman's expression had hardened to stone. Austin sat paralyzed, his entire world collapsing. Amber's affair, his mother's confession, the truth laid bare before everyone. Amber stared at the table, jaw clenched, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Whitman removed his glasses and set them down with careful deliberation. "In 30 years on this bench, I've witnessed many schemes. Desperation, greed, families destroyed over money." He paused, fixing Austin with a hard stare. "But this case is particularly cruel. Mr. Austin Caldwell, you conspired with your wife to defraud your own father, the man who built everything you've ever had. You forged documents. You fabricated evidence. You committed perjury before a federal court, and you terrorized your mother into silence through threats and intimidation." He turned to Amber. "Ms. Kane, your role is equally reprehensible. Manipulation, fraud, infidelity, witness tampering." His voice rose. "This court will not tolerate such conduct. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. All materials are referred to the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution. Bankruptcy, fraud, perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, witness tampering." He glanced at Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, the Bar Association will be notified." Judge Whitman raised his gavel. Crack! "This court is adjourned." Austin sat frozen, staring at the table. Reality sinking in slowly. Amber stood to leave. A marshal blocked the door. "Ma'am, remain seated." She sat back down, trapped. Thornton shoved papers into his briefcase, avoiding all eyes. The gallery erupted, reporters rushing out, phones raised. Diane remained on the stand, crying. Relief and guilt mixed together. James exhaled slowly, didn't look at Austin. Claire gathered documents with calm efficiency. Austin turned toward Amber. How could you? Don't talk to me, she snapped, voice ice cold. Austin's face crumpled. As the courtroom emptied, Austin approached James near the exit. Dad, please. James raised one hand, said nothing, turned and walked out with Claire. Diane hesitated, then followed James, staying several steps behind. Austin stood alone at the plaintiff's table. Amber gone, escorted by marshals. Marcus Reed had vanished. Thornton fled. Gallery cleared. Austin sank into his chair, head in hands. Everything, marriage, inheritance, parents, freedom gone in one morning. The courtroom emptied except for a bailiff and Austin Caldwell, sitting in the wreckage of his own making. The trial was over. But for Austin Caldwell, the punishment was only beginning. The FBI moved fast. Within 48 hours, federal investigators had Richard Thornton cooperating fully. Facing disbarment, he handed over everything: emails, recorded calls, documents tracing the conspiracy to Amber. The U.S. attorney offered plea deals. Amber, 2 years prison. $500,000 restitution, 5 years supervised release. Austin, no prison, 3 years probation, $300,000 in fines, permanent felony record. Thornton, 1 year suspension, public censure. They'll both accept, Claire told me. I sat in my office looking at Seattle's skyline and felt nothing, just exhaustion. Good. 1 week later, Amber filed for divorce from prison, demanding half Austin's remaining assets, almost nothing after legal fees. Austin lost. The Madison Park house moved to a cramped South Seattle apartment. He called my office 10 times in 2 weeks. I just need to explain. My assistant, Mr. Caldwell, isn't available. After the 10th call, tell him to stop. The call stopped. A month later, security called. Your son is at the gate. I pulled up the camera. Austin sat in his car outside, staring at the house. I changed the gate code. Don't let him in. He sat there an hour before leaving. I watched him go and felt something crack inside. Not forgiveness, just grief. For the son I thought I'd raised. For the man he could have been. Diane and I started therapy. Working through her silence, my sense of betrayal. You were threatened, I said. I understand fear. I should have trusted you, she whispered. Yes, you should have. Silence. But he failed himself. Amber didn't force him to choose fraud. That decision was his. Do you think we'll ever reconcile? Diane asked. No. He made his choice. We make ours. She nodded, choosing our marriage over our son. It hurt her every day, but it was necessary. The healing between us was slow, but real. Caldwell Development Group stabilized quickly. Projects continued. I promoted Daniel Reeves, a 15-year project director, to Chief Operating Officer. Based on merit, I told the board. Not bloodline. New contracts arrived. The Seattle business community rallied. James Caldwell was vindicated. I began considering retirement on my terms when I was ready. 1 year later, evening, I sat in my home office windows overlooking Seattle at dusk. The buildings I'd built still stood lights glowing against the darkening sky. Diane brought tea, sat beside me quietly. An old photo album lay open. Austin at 8, grinning, missing his front teeth at a little league game I'd coached. Do you ever think about reaching out? She asked softly. Every day, I said, and every day I choose not to. I closed the album, put it away. I gave him everything, Diane. Everything except what he wanted: most instant success, without earning it, without the struggle. I looked out at the rain beginning to fall. He didn't understand that the building process is the point. The failures, getting knocked down and standing back up. That's what gives success meaning. That's what makes it worth something. Pause. He's not my son anymore. Not in any way that matters. The Austin I raised died the day he chose money over integrity. Seattle's lights reflected off wet streets, the city shimmering. I turned to the blueprints on my desk. A new building, a new legacy, no family name attached. Some legacies aren't meant to be inherited, Diane. Some have to be earned through your own work, your own integrity, your own sacrifice. You can't skip the building part and expect it to mean anything. I stood by the window, round, streaking the glass. And some people never learn the difference. They think they can take what someone else built and call it theirs. But a legacy without the struggle behind it is just an empty inheritance. It has no soul. She squeezed my shoulder gently, then left me alone. I looked out at Seattle, at the skyline I'd helped shape the buildings that would stand long after I was gone. Monuments to 30 years of discipline and integrity, and work that no one could forge or fabricate or steal. The work continued. Life continued. Without Austin. I sit in my office looking out over Seattle, the buildings I constructed still standing resilient. I no longer feel anger, only a deep sadness. I taught Austin how to build a company, but I forgot to teach him how to build character. That is the biggest mistake of my life, a painful part of the grandpa stories I will never want to tell. I tried to give my son everything, but Austin wanted the shortcut, wanting the inheritance without putting in the sweat. He didn't understand that the value of a legacy lies in the struggle, in the 30 years of discipline, not in the moment of receiving the keys. I believe that God is always watching, and the punishment came from him losing himself, not from the court. This story is a true story about the difference between money and merit. Never be mistaken. What you earn is truly yours, but what you steal will destroy you. I pray that God grants him clarity, even though I cannot do anything more. This true story should serve as a wake-up call about greed and entitlement. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Comment your thoughts below on these kinds of grandpa stories of greed and redemption. Subscribe to the channel to learn from life's mistakes together.